We are looking very carefully into a wonderful prayer in Nehemiah chapter 9. Joshua the high priest is praying for the people, and in his public prayer, which is giving us a wonderful example of praying publicly, is really going through the history in some sense of Israel, and starting out with praising God for his provisions and all he's done, and then confessing the failure of the people, but then turning back to compassionate and forgiving God that didn't turn on them, didn't turn away from them. But then he goes to verse 26, and he even though God once again had done so much for these people, he's looking at the history of the nation of Israel still. He's going to get around to his own audience a little later, but now he goes back to the people in the past. How did they appropriate God's graciousness and God's forgiveness? And the answer is not very well. And so we go to confession. Once again, he admits that his people, his ancestors, had not followed the Lord very well. They rebelled against him. In verse 26, he says this, "But they became disobedient and rebelled against you and cast your law behind their backs and killed your prophets who had testified to them, so that they might return to you, and they committed great blasphemies. Therefore you gave them to the hands of the ones who distressed them, and they afflicted them and with distress. But at the time of their distress they cried to you, and you listened from heaven. And according to all your abundant compassion, you gave them saviors, and they saved them from the hand of the ones that distressed them. But as soon as they had rest, they returned to do evil before you. Therefore you forsook them in the hand of the enemies, so they had dominion over them. And they returned and cried to you, and you listened from heaven, and many times you delivered them according to your compassion, and testified to them in order to turn them back to your law, in that they acted presumptuously, did not listen to your commandments, but sinned against your judgments, by which if a man does them, he shall live. And they gave a stubborn shoulder and stiffed their neck and would not listen. However, you bore with them for many years and testified to them by your Spirit, by the hand of your prophets, yet they would not give ear. And so you gave them to the hands of the people of the lands. Nevertheless, in your abundant compassion, you did not make a complete destruction of them or forsake them, for you are gracious and compassionate God." Now, this is a very sad commentary. These people had been blessed with so very, very much, again, turned on the Lord time and time again. So our passage says, and Joshua is admitting this. They did not appreciate what God had done. They turned their backs on him. And yet the Lord continued to work with them, continued to forgive them, continued to shower them with compassion. But the day came when the Lord finally turned them over to their enemies. They went into exile, first the northern nation of Israel in about 721, and then later Judah itself in about 586 was the final part of that exile. Both nations went into exile as punishment for the rejection of the Lord. But the Lord did not give up on them. And that's the point here. Even though they had given up on the Lord never gave up on them. He continued to be compassionate. And the day would come, and he promised it would come, when he would bring the people back to the land, and he would give them this land again. And that's what sets up the final aspect of this great public prayer of Joshua. He is now going to, after giving this great history of Israel, he's going to turn back to the people. God had brought back a remnant of people to the land of promise. These were mostly from the southern tribes of Judah. The northern tribe did not ever actually return in mass. There might have been individuals, but they never came. They were scattered among the peoples of the world. But now these people had come back. The Lord had once again blessed them in abundant ways. So how will this generation, Joshua's generation, Nehemiah's generation, how are they going to appropriate all the kindness and the blessings of God? Well, that's how Joshua ends his prayer, by discussing that and talking about that. We're going to look at that at the first part of next week and see what this prayer teaches us. So I hope you can join us next week.